Research Academy. And I am a former president of the Philippine Economic Society, and currently I am a member of the PES Board of Trustees. And I will be your session moderator for this afternoon. Wait, let me take this out to make it clearer, perhaps, not the words that I am speaking. Our session is comprised of 3 papers that showcases econometric models and techniques and apply this to examine economic issues such as the gender gap in job search, the link between public debt and economic development, and the use of a large Bayesian vector autoregressive model in nowcasting the economy. So our presentations look at these issues from different economies. So this is very interesting. We have a paper looking at the case for Pakistan, for Nigeria, and of course for the Philippines. So the session will proceed as follows. We'll first have the 3 presentations, after which we will open the virtual floor to questions, clarifications, or comments. So is Mr. Forum with us now? Miguel?
Mr. Forum is not yet here, ma'am.
Okay, sige. So, Marcus, you'll be the first now. So, without further delay, let's start our session. So, let me introduce our first paper presenter. Mr. Marcus Jude San Pedro is a colleague of mine from the BSP, and he will discuss the application of a VAR model with mixed frequency data in nowcasting the Philippine economy. Marcus, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Ms. Faye. So let me just share my screen. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, Marcus, we can hear you.
Thank you for. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can, Marcus.
Thank you. Right. So let me start. A pleasant afternoon to all. I am Marcus San Pedro from the BSP Department of Economic Research, Economic and Financial Forecasting Group. And for this presentation, I'll discuss our work on nowcasting titled An Application of Large Bayesian Vector Autoregressive or BVAR model in nowcasting the Philippine economy. So the outline of the presentation are as follows. So we start with the motivation of the research. We then proceed with some nowcasting literatures, specifically in the case of the Philippines, followed by explicitly stating the BVAR representation and the data structure. Finally, we discuss the model's forecast performance to data vintages. But before anything else, the full electronic manuscript of this work can be accessed at the BSP website in the BSP Working Paper Series. This is one of the nowcasting models initiatives of the Department of Economic Research. So if you are interested, I can send the link in the chat box later after my presentation of the full paper. All right. So there are a lot of challenges in nowcasting economic activity in real time. For this paper, we try to address three key challenges, particularly the following. So first, the mixed frequency nature common to large sets of time series data. This issue stems from the collection of conventional and unconventional data, given advancements in technology and the improvements of computing capacity. So due to the differing frequency of indicators, so for example, we have data for a quarterly, monthly, weekly, and daily frequency. So we decided to come up with a strategy to combine a balanced time series structure. And then second, we have the publication lags and data revisions, which are evident to official statistics. And these are, of course, sources of your modeling challenges. And then finally, the curse of dimensionality is also explored in this paper. So over-parameterization caused by relatively small sample size against large number of estimated parameters is not new to typical time series analysis. So for the typical ordinary least squares estimation, we will deviate or we won't be able to satisfy most of our assumptions, model assumptions. We tried to address this issue by imposing shrinkage to parameters by or via Bayesian estimation. And to give us a glimpse, in this slide, we illustrate the actual data flow of indicators used in this study for the third quarter of 2022. So earlier today, the 2022 Q3 actual national accounts of the Philippines was released by the Philippine Statistics Authority. And the actual year-on-year growth of the Philippines is at 7.6%. But prior to this release, the actual data flow for potential indicators varies. So as we can see from the table, this is as of November 8, 2022. And not to mention, there are differing frequency of these variables. So as an example, the September Labor Force Survey, or LFS, was released 2 days ago to complete the Q3 performance in the labor market for the national account of the Philippines. While the production indices almost have the same publication timeline as your monthly LFS. However, data such as the monthly overseas Filipino cash remittances, or the OFW cash remittances, only have its actual figure for August, even after the NAP release. So instances as such gives challenges in modeling and producing nowcasts or forecasts of the real-time performance of the economy. So these are just some of the data issues that we try to that we encounter in our daily collection of our data, or as new data come in. So now we proceed to the some nowcasting studies. All right, so nowcasting is a thriving research area for time series econometrics and central bank applications. So in 2019, Rufino utilized the Midas regression in solving the mixed frequency problem. So it's mixed data sampling in nowcasting the Philippine economic growth. So several indicators were also included for variants of the Midas model. In particular, the differing frequency of the target variable, so in this case, the GDP growth, with some indicators such as the monthly inflation, industrial production, and the Philippine Stock Exchange Index, or PSEI, indicated that the superiority of the Midas framework over traditional models. So when we say traditional, these are your univariate time series models. More recently, a chapter in the Handbook of Statistics by Dr. Mariano and Dr. Osmocor in 2020 explored data parsimonious to data-intensive nowcasting models. So models such as mixed frequency dynamic factor latent model, or what they call the MFPF-LM. And then they have the current quarterly model, the CQM. And they also utilize the Midas regressions, or the mixed data sampling regressions, and using Philippine data. So empirical exercises pointed to the potentially superior performance of the mixed frequency dynamic factor latent model for forecasting GDP growth, while the Midas regression performs slightly better when forecasting inflation. Right. So practices of central banks also involve utilizing near-term forecasting models, such as the case for the European Central Bank, or the ECB, which uses factor models in a state space representation with the real-time data flow. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve of Cleveland implemented Bayesian mixed frequency vector autoregressions in producing historical, quote-unquote, true quarterly estimates of your GDP. Their recent work illustrated how new monthly data contribute to the historical understanding of business cycles and provide real-time nowcasting of monthly GDP over the pandemic recession. Of course, the BSP is no different in using near-term forecasting models. So nowcasts play a vital role in the suite of macroeconomic models of the bank, particularly as an added assumption to the path of economic growth and inflation dynamics. The BSP's forecasting and policy analysis system, or the FPAS framework, subscribes to a suite of models to generate macroeconomic outlook. And then under this approach, the nowcast of GDP growth serves as the initial condition and feeds into the medium-term forecasting models. So we come up with short-term estimates, and then we feed this into our macro workhorse models. So at present, we have ARIMA models for both the expenditure and the production sides of GDP. And of course, these are subjected or complemented with the judgment of sector specialists to generate nowcast of our GDP. And then we are also working on some state space models, some Midas and bridge equation models, which produce short-term up to nowcast up to short-term forecasts. And then, of course, the introduction of our model, which is what we are discussing in this paper. And so now we proceed to the Bayesian VAR model representation and the data that we utilize in this study. So a typical VAR of order P representation is seen in this equation, wherein the y sub t are your small n-dimensional vector of observed variables at time t. Your CRs are your vector of constants. Your a sub 1 up to say a sub p are your coefficient matrices. And your epsilon sub t are your vector of errors, which are assumed to be normally distributed with a variance covariance matrix sigma. So the VARP representation is simply a multi-equation regression where the regressors are the lag-dependent variables such that there are small n equations. So this represents your number of variables, and each equation has small k. So this k is just equal to the number of equation times the number of lag value plus 1 regressors, totaling to small n times k coefficients in the system. So in this type of setup, typical sample sizes generated from a low frequency variable, as in the case of a quarterly GDP growth, can be smaller than the number of VAR coefficients. So imagine if you are using VAR of lag p, and say you have 21 variables, so that's roughly 2,205 coefficients that you need to estimate, as compared or versus a 10-year period or 10-year sample quarterly data. And this is a problem imposed in most unrestricted VARs that considers large amount of indicators and relatively high specification of lag structure, resulting to overparametrization. But before anything else, there are a lot of prior advancements in the prior studies, but in particular, we try to use or utilize the GLP prior. So this is proposed by Gianon, Lenza, and Primiceri in 2015. And it's a type of conjugate prior. It revolves around the normal inverse Wishart family of distribution. This prior uniquely identifies the hyperparameters of the Minnesota and normal inverse Wishart distribution by maximizing the marginal data density over the estimation period. So the proposed outline for the prior is such that the prior estimates are treated to be additional parameters to be estimated. So as against to specifying a value for your overall shrinkage parameter, for the GLP prior, we are also estimating this parameter, and we just specify initial values for your hyper priors. And with the advancement of technology and the increasing computing power of modern computers, the GLP procedure is able to simulate the posterior distribution of the overall shrinkage parameter based on Metropolis algorithm. And according to empirical exercises, the use of this prior improved model performance, of course, at the expense of your computational power. So we have 21 variables for this paper. We have applied a large Bayesian VAR to 4 quarterly macroeconomic indicators and 17 time aggregated monthly indicators. So the quarterly macroeconomic indicators, well, except for the unemployment rate, are transformed by getting the year-on-year growth rates, while every monthly aggregated variable were transformed to its corresponding log differences to achieve stationarity. So the general Beaver model removed the estimation of the constant term in each of its equation in the system to account for the data transformation used. And finally, we proceed to the forecasting performance. Before we discuss the forecast performance, we first describe the strategy used. We initially compare the different forecasting horizons with benchmark models. So we use an AR2 and a random walk model. So we chose these two univariate time series models because according to literature, this represents a benchmarks, or it's like a gold standard when benchmarking multivariate as against two univariate time series. for a GDP data or your economic growth. So the reported results are based on 200,000 draws. So this is for the Metropolis algorithm with 20% burn-in. Hyper priors were treated hierarchically, as what we've discussed from the previous slide, prior specification. We compared the out-of-sample forecasts from all model and generated forecasting performance using the root mean squared errors or RMSE and the mean absolute errors or your MAE. In addition, we identified a structural break as a consideration for the estimation period, which is highlighted in the table by blue. So pre-COVID-19, so this is the 2005 Q2 to 2018 Q4 data vintage. And during the pandemic, which is from 2005 Q2 to 2020 Q1 onwards. So in the first table, the Bayesian VAR outperformed the AR2 model for the nowcast and the short-term forecasting exercise in both RMSE and MAE measures. Note that in this case, despite a high lag specification for the BVAR, in this case, we're using lag value of 5, small sample was not an issue in estimating the 2,205 parameters. As compared to, of course, using your standard VAR in an ordinary least squares estimation. However, this is not the case for the nowcast and one step ahead forecast. So H equals to 1, that's your nowcast. H equals 2, that's your one step forecast, while H equals 4 is your 1 year forecast. In the next table, the outlying values present towards the latter part of almost all economic indicators impose an issue in the estimation of high lag specifications, particularly on the variance-covariance structure. So prior to the pandemic, a 1 year lag specification was induced and the BVAR model was able to include a large P, which is equal to 5. This is not the case upon realization of the pandemic effects for 2005 Q2 up to 2020 Q2. From implementation of strict lockdowns, reducing the allowed lag structure to 3. So formally it's 5. This, however, is still able to outperform the autoregressive model in most data vintages up to the most recent rolling forecast. Again, the same story may be observed prior to the pandemic. The BVAR was able to outperform the random walk model across all possible nowcasting and forecasting horizon. The reduction of the lag structure also outperformed the benchmark as in the autoregressive model upon learning realized values from 2020 Q1 and 2020 Q2. However, the random walk model outperformed the BVAR model in the latter data vintages, and this may be attributed to the increase in measurement errors when using large information set within the system. So according to studies, a medium number of indicators will suffice to have a good forecasting performance. The advantage is that forecasts of these variables in the VAR system can also be produced to determine which indicators were driving the GDP forecast produced as opposed to a univariate approach. Of course, we also implemented the Diebold-Mariano test. In the Diebold-Mariano test, results verified that the forecasting performance of your BVAR is superior over the random walk model over the first data vintage. So this is pre-pandemic. And for 2005 Q2 to 2021 Q1 estimation period with 2 forecasting horizon. This is represented by your asterisk, and we used a p-value of, we used a level of significance, 5% level of significance. Overall, the results manifested the plausibility of using the BVAR model for operational use as an addition and complement to the models used in coming up with initial value of GDP, while an assessment of its improvement with the presence of structural breaks may be an area of further research. So as next steps, of course, we plan to, or we intend to compare our forecast to private sector forecasts. And of course, we are also keen to checking the forecasting performance of not just the GDP growth of the Philippines, but also for inflation, the disaggregate components of your GDP, such as your household consumption, the government consumption, etc. Since it's in a VAR system. And finally, we are we're doing an ongoing project casting this BVAR into a state space form. So instead of aggregating the data because of course, there may be some loss of information. We try to model the GDP, quarterly GDP data, and the monthly indicators as is by casting it into a state space. And by this approach, you can also produce monthly nowcasts of your GDP. So this is an ongoing project. And I guess this ends my slide, and I look forward to your questions after the presentations of the other participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. If you have any questions about the presentation, you can type in your questions in the chat box, and we'll read them during the open forum. Kindly write your name and affiliation so we can properly acknowledge you. So on to our next presentation. So Ms. Nikita Colley of Duke University will discuss the work that they have done on gender gap in job search in urban Pakistan. Ms. Colley, the virtual floor is yours. Mhm. Is Miss Colley? I thought I saw her earlier. Karen?
Ma'am, nawala siya.
Oh, okay. Okay, so perhaps in the interest of time, if you have any questions muna in the previous presentation, the presentation of Marcus, perhaps you can already go there as we wait for Miss Colley to rejoin us. There she is. Miss Colley? Miss Colley, are you ready for your presentation? Can she hear me? Miss Colley, Miss Nikita. Okay, I think she might be having some difficulty, some technical issues, no, from her end. So perhaps what we can do is that in the interest of time, if you have any questions on the presentation of Marcus, perhaps we can entertain them now. So any questions, any comments, any clarifications that you would want to ask? There, Miss. Hi, good afternoon, Miss Nikita. Are you ready for your presentation? There.
Hi, yes, I'm so sorry, my internet's collapsing. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you. So, okay, so
great.
perhaps
I'm so sorry.
it's okay. Okay, so the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There we go. So can you see a PDF?
Not yet. Oh, there, yes. Yeah,
Okay,
now
great.
we can see.
And you can still see my PDF, right? I also have a Word document opened up.
Yes, we can see I think this is the PDF, the slides.
Excellent, excellent. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And I'm really excited to present work that I have going on with my co-authors. One of whom's at the Asian Development Bank, the others at Bates College, Kate's with me at Duke, and then we have Zunia at the Lahore School of Economics. We're working on decomposing the gender gap in job search in Lahore, Pakistan. So just going to get started. So what's our motivation? Despite rising female education levels in the past few years, there's vast gender gaps in employment, particularly in South Asia. So where do these gender gaps come from? They could result from the supply side or from demand side factors, such as firms maybe not wanting to hire women or wanting to hire men for very specific tasks. So what do? We exploit detailed administrative data from a job matching platform in Lahore, along with an IRR experiment to decompose gender gaps in Lahore all along the job search process. The data we use for this paper comes from a representative sample of households in Lahore and covers every step of the jobs process. So from signing up for the platform to choosing occupations to being matched and the interview process. This lets us identify gender gaps at every step of the process. However, end-stage interviews, which determine if a candidate is selected for a job, is entirely endogenous to what firms post and who ends up applying. So we cannot cleanly test mechanisms for why we observe gaps. While we can identify these gaps, it's harder to understand exactly why they come up. So to sort of answer this, we combine our administrative data with IRR data. So we have observations for a spectrum of firms, and the IRR experiment, which I'll explain some more, has a very realistic setup, which helps us to understand how firms would select CVs where there's some random variation. And it also lets us test mechanisms to explain patterns we see in the administrative data. Together, both these data sets allow us to both observe gender gaps and then test for mechanisms. So what are our key findings, just to preview? We find that women are less likely to work at baseline, less likely to sign up for the platform, and also less likely to apply to jobs. This appears to be driven by firm side requirements and not supply side. So it's not women choosing the wrong occupations. Firms' existing gender composition, so that's the number of female employees they have currently, influences their decision to hire more women in the future. This matters much more for female candidates with lower education. At higher education levels, the firm gender composition does not matter as much, which is a surprising result that we're trying to study further. And finally, we also find evidence of integration costs. So like I said before, the more women you have already in the firm, the more likely you are to hire more. So that speaks a little bit to the fixed costs of having women work at your firm in Pakistan. So what's our context? We're going to be studying Lahore, which is a city of approximately 11 million people. Job search and matching platforms are generally growing pretty rapidly in low and middle income countries. LinkedIn has about 10 million users in about 8 LMICs. And in Pakistan specifically, Rosie, LinkedIn, and Beti, which is like a combination of job platforms, have about 20 million users. So we're going to be talking about Job Talash, which is a job search platform started by a research team in Lahore. They have data from a representative listing of 50,000 households in the city. The individuals sampled were about 33 to 34 years old on average, 50% women, about 10% women were employed at baseline, 70 to 80% men were employed at baseline, and about 70% of men and women have less than high school education, 16% have greater than high school education. So what is the process altogether? So now I'm talking about the job search platform. We begin with a representative listing of 50,000 households in Lahore. Every adult in the household that was surveyed is offered free sign up for the job search service. So crucially, this means that we can observe gender gaps at each stage, from their listing to then signing up and indicating interest. About 9,000 people in total sign up for the job search service. And what are the steps? So the steps are job seekers register. So that's our 9,000 who registered. They provide their CVs and sector preferences, so areas of work that they might be interested in. The firms post ads. So firms also sign up as part of this platform to post ads for people they'd like to hire. Job seekers match to ads based on education, experience, and preferences. Obviously, the preferences they stated in step 1. Job seekers then receive matches. Job seekers choose whether to apply. They receive these matches over text message and over phone calls in some cases. The platform sends the applications to firms based on step 5, and then the firms invite job seekers to interview. So right here towards the right of my screen, you see a sample of a text message that an individual receives. So what are the key features? Just to recap, we observe very specifically who signs up for the platform and who does not, and we can characterize them and the differences in these groups. We observe exactly what matches are sent to which job seekers and whether they apply to each one. So we have perfect insight into the entire process at all these stages. Because we provide information to both sides, to firms and to workers, to potential workers, we observe all the information that they have about each other. So there's no unobserved quality signals which confound other work that tries to answer similar questions. And finally, we observe many variables unconditionally. So for example, whether a female job seeker selects an occupation, regardless of whether the firm is interested in hiring women or not. So we get their unconditional preferences and so on, and vice versa for firms. So that's just all of our platform data. That's a very quick overview of everything there. Now moving on to what the IRR experiment does. That's the incentivized resume rating experiment. It's a novel framed field experiment. The methodology is very similar to a classic paper in AER published 2019, which really lays out the steps for the process. So what do? Employers who signed up to be part of our platform, so our sample firms, are shown a set of CVs which differed randomly on key traits. Fictitious names are used, so we use very generic Pakistani names so as to not bias them in any way or distract. Then they're asked to pick who they would hire. So they're shown a pair of CVs. The CVs differ on very specific traits. It could be gender, it could be the name of the person and things like that. They're asked to choose. And this is very realistic. So IRRs usually face the criticism that they're not very realistic, but in our case, because we go to participating firms and we tell them that based on the answers you give us in the IRR experiment, we're going to tailor the matches you receive. So they have incentive to be honest because they've signed up for this platform to reduce employment frictions. The CVs for the experiment, though there's random traits swapped in the pairs given to work to firms, the data comes from real job applicants. So what this means is that employers are very aware that even the data that they see, while it creates a fictional CV, the source data comes from the real labor supply pool in Lahore. Further, we have CV pairs sampled for every combination of education and work experience. You can imagine 3 maybe education levels, 10 work experience, you sample together. So every combination of those 3 and 10. After a pair of CVs is picked, one trait, which either gender, university name, or FSC scores are randomly swapped between the CVs. Gender is also cross-randomized with these CV characteristics to specifically get the effect of gender on hiring. And this helps us understand under what circumstances does an employer's preference switch for hiring men versus women. So based on which trait in the CV was switched along with gender. And finally, like I said, all the data in these CVs comes from real candidates. This makes the experiment way more realistic. So this was just a background of all the data we're going to be using. Now I'm going to get into the analysis pieces. One of the first questions we ask using the platform data job talash, which is the administrative piece, is to quantify the gender gap at every stage of the job process. So we run the following specification. We regress individual level outcomes on an indicator for if an individual is female or not. We have data on approximately 200,000 individuals from all of our listing surveys. We have robust standard errors. And the very first set of tables I show you, the tables are a little bit wordy, so I'm going to talk through them very quickly. So we find that of all of our approximately 200,000 candidates, women are much less likely to be working at baseline, less likely to be interested in job talash, and less likely to complete sign up. The fourth column tells you that from the group of individuals who was interested, women are still less likely to complete sign up. So it's not just restricting the sample does not change our result at all. We also have a gender gap in occupational interests and matching. So of the 9,000 people who actively sign up for the platform, the approximately 9,000, women list fewer areas in which they're interested, fewer number. They're less likely to be matched to a job, so that's unconditional. And they're also less likely to be matched to a job when you restrict to the pool that's signed up for the platform. So column 2 is an unconditional result, where we just look at all women. Finally, there's also a gender gap in applications and interview selection. Women are less likely to apply to jobs, and they're also less likely to be invited to interview. This difference goes away conditional on signing up and applying. So of the select pool that sign up and apply to jobs, there's no statistical difference between men and women being invited to interview. So that's a few of the gender gaps we observe from our platform administrative data. Now we move away from an individual level analysis to a dyad level analysis, and I'll just explain what we're trying to do here. So now we want to understand if gender gaps come from worker occupational selection. Are women choosing differently? Are they choosing different occupations that they're mismatched to, and that's why they don't get matched? Or is it firms that specifically want men for their jobs? So we try to answer this by transforming our data set in a specific way. We construct all possible dyads of job seeker and job ad, so combinations of them, even if the match did not occur. So combinations of all job seekers with all job ads. We run the following analysis at the dyad level. So we have dyad level outcomes regressed on an indicator for if the individual involved in that dyad, the job seeker, is female. We have data on approximately 6 million individual job dyads, which come from 644 jobs and 9,937 individuals. Our standard errors in these specifications are clustered at the level of the individual and the job. In this, we have one table. This table's, again, a little bit more wordy. I hope you can see my screen clearly. The first column sample is those individuals who qualify based on education and experience. So the outcome is, of these individuals who qualify on education and experience, do they qualify based on gender? We see that women are less likely to qualify based on gender, even after matching on education and experience. Column 2 tells us that of those who qualify on education and on experience and picked the right occupation, do they qualify for gender? We see that this gap still exists. So it's not that women are, this speaks to more of a firm side gap than a labor supply side gap. Columns 3 and 4, sorry, excuse me, speak a little bit more to the labor side. So in 3 and 4, we tells us if a worker selected a given occupation. In column 4, we see that among the sample who qualified based on all criteria, there is no gender difference in occupational selection. So women are not systematically choosing wrong occupations that don't get them matched. The takeaway from this table is that much of the gender gap in matches comes not from women choosing the right or wrong occupations for which they qualify based on education and experience, but it comes from firms' explicit gender criteria for their jobs. So that's what we observe in the platform level analysis. Now, to sort of understand why, we're working with the IRR data to shed light on mechanisms. So in the IRR experimental analysis, our aim is to identify the role of gender in CV selection by firms of different types. So we classify firms in very specific ways, and I'll talk more about that in the next table. So we run the following specification at the CV firm pair level. The outcome is if a CV was selected, it is regressed on an indicator for if the CV's candidate is female, along with an interaction, or if the candidate is female, interacted with some firm characteristics that's given by XK. So the next bullet just explains that. Standard errors are clustered by CV pairs. We have about 149 employees who were shown among a total of 382 CV pairs. So that's what the data structure looks like. Table 1 shows us that our IRR experiment is actually pretty realistic. So if you look at column 1, all this tells us is that if an employer who belongs to the group, the firm respondent for this survey is female, they're more likely to pick a female respondent, which makes sense. So if you are at a firm and you're taking part in this experiment and are making hiring decisions and you are female, you're more likely to hire a female candidate. Column 2's group is basically if the firm belongs to a group that ever posts ads for only females, they're also more likely to hire women. So that's the female CV into group coefficient. Similarly, column 3's group is if a firm ever posts an ad open to females, then they're also more likely to hire, as opposed to a group that does not have ads that are posting open to females. Column 4 is if a firm has any female employees, and column 5 has if a firm has all female employees. And you basically see that if a firm is already hiring women, in the IRR experiment, they're also more likely to pick out female CV. So we use this table to sort of show that our IRR experiment does a pretty good job of matching intuition in the situation. Finally, one of the pieces of analysis we do is we try to understand CV selection based on educational levels. So the outcome here is basically if a CV is chosen. High education is if a candidate has a BA or an MA. Medium is if they've studied until the 9th or 10th grade. Intermediate is the 11th or 12th grade. So we sort of club medium and intermediate here. And low is if you have up to 8th grade education or none or primary education. So those are sort of our 3 groups. What we see from this graph is that a firm with no women is much less likely to choose female CVs for low and middle educated women, which is very different from firms with any women. So if you hire women anyway, you're more likely to hire them regardless of their education level. But at higher levels of education and female CVs, even firms that have no women or very few women are likely to hire female CVs. So this is all to say that for women of a higher education, they face less discrimination in the way of firm gender composition than women with lower education levels. And then we try to test some mechanisms. So one of the mechanisms we try to understand is integration costs. So we use, again, the dyad level data. We restrict our sample to firms of 2 types, those with no women and those with less than a quarter women. So very few women and no women. We compare the qualification and interview outcomes for firms with no women to firms with very few women. And here's what we find. We find that for firms with no women, they're less likely to have female candidates qualify based on gender, which makes sense. So even having very few women in your firm means you're more likely to have women qualify for your jobs. And women are much less likely to be interviewed for jobs in firms with no women at all, which is intuitive, but also speaks to integration costs in our setting. Just to recap and sort of wrap up, we observe gender gaps in labor force participation, which is very evident from early sign-up stages. The platform data shows that women who apply are less likely to qualify based on gender, even after they meet education and experience criteria, and even after they select the right occupation. At higher levels of education, firm gender composition matters much less for CV selection for women. And if a firm already has female employees or has ever posted an ad for women, they're more likely to pick a woman CV, holding all else constant, or even invite them for interviews. In conclusion, we're trying to do more work to understand how gender gap along the process sort of varies with different education levels because of the result we saw from the IRR experiment. We're also trying to understand mechanisms a little bit better. So we want to understand female composition, gender of the IRR respondent a little more to understand place-based discrimination. We plan to use data on tasks and nature of work from job ads, which we observe on our platform, to test for statistical discrimination. And that's sort of where we're at. We really look forward to everyone's feedback and ideas for other things we could potentially do. But I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Colley, for that very interesting presentation. So let me now open the virtual floor to questions for our 2 presentations. So any questions or comments, or as Ms. Colley is asking for suggestions, potentially for insights that you may have on the presentations. Okay, let me start the ball rolling. That's a very interesting study, Miss Nikita. Let me call you Miss Nikita on Pakistan. So I'm just curious. Do you exactly know the firms or the industries wherein women are not being hired, or perhaps that has a bearing, right? Because some industries are more inclined to get males because the type of job, the nature of the job itself is meant for males. Not really about discrimination, but it's more that they have let's say a comparative advantage, say construction or engineering or something like more male. But so do you have that kind of information about the firms that have preferences more for males, or those that actually do hire women?
No, that's a great question. So I think off the top of my head, teaching is a profession that's almost entirely dominated by women in Lahore. While on the other hand, I think any, like you said, construction, manufacturing, but also firms that ask in their job ads for individuals to work overtime or to travel overnight or to travel regularly for work, implicitly rule out women. So not so much because they can't do the work, but then there's conditions attached to the work that make it very
Mhm,
hard for the average woman to work at these firms. So we do have data on that, and
mhm.
that's exactly what we're trying to study some more, like within
Yeah.
industry to understand, like say travel or tourism. So just within that industry, which are the firms that hire women and don't, and why do they hire women or why do they not? So that's
Mhm.
one of the things we're trying to study. But we do have information on all this, yeah.
Oh, that's very nice. Because just to share, actually here in the Philippines, previously our labor law actually didn't allow women to do graveyard shift, like if they work at overnight or something. But because of the advent of BPOs, of course, because we are servicing countries in say the US or Europe, and we have a different time zone. So some of them had to work at night. So I think we kind of um, uh, amended that law to allow women, but previously women are not also allowed to work at night. So firms that actually have operations or operating at night, by the nature of their jobs, cannot hire women previously, but now. And then another question that I have is, because now there's more sensitivity when it comes to gender, right? So firms and companies, they try to have a balance in hiring men and women. So I'm not sure about the case in Pakistan, if that is also the case, that you kind of try to have somewhat of a balance in hiring uh, female workers and male workers.
So to be honest, I don't think that's any. I've not seen that been explicitly stated in their
Mhm,
hiring
mhm.
process. In fact, I think there are ads that explicitly ask for men or women. So I don't think that's so much
Okay.
um, of a criteria yet. But there is a push towards building, I think, most gender sensitive infrastructure. So you
Mhm,
see more firms building separate toilets, separate prayer space, separate working
mhm,
space, because there might be women from families that are more conservative, that may not want them interacting with men at the workspace. So
mhm,
you do
mhm,
observe that there are firms that are more sensitive, that are doing more work to have women work with them and to feel safe.
mhm.
And we observe that, but I don't think as yet there's an active push to do the
50
50-50% equal
or at least a
representation.
representation for men and women.
At least we don't see it. Yeah.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Um, perhaps a question for Marcus. Marcus, well, not really much of a question, because I think you and I would understand each other because we're both from the central bank. So perhaps my this is more for the other participants, and it may be some clarification on why central banks are into developing, say, nowcasting models, and why we need to strengthen and strengthen our forecasting models, and including itong pag-develop when we develop this nowcasting. So why central banks are really into developing this nowcasting model. So just the rationale.
Okay, so thank you for that question, Speak. Well, basically, our central banks are trying to come up with a story when they provide long-term or medium-term forecast of the economy. So we go back to our motivation of producing nowcasts or timely nowcasts as an initial condition to feed into these larger models that we have. So from past literatures, nowcasts only play as or the forecasting performance of our nowcasts are only effective up to 2 forecast horizons. But these forecasts are producing very little forecast errors, which can be used by central banks to feed the larger models that we have, because these larger models will produce so for example, some semi-structural models, some very large error correction models. These nowcasts will play a vital role, especially if we would like to come up with a story. So of course, real-time data come as much as daily data. And these types of frequencies are good indicators of the real-time forecast of real-time performance of our economy. So these are very crucial numbers to central banks.
Also, one thing now, Marcos, is of course the advent of big data, no? That we are able to actually harness these large data sets in doing modeling. So how would this actually impact when we develop these kinds of, say, nowcasting model or even forecasting models in central banks?
Oh, well, with the advancements of technology, of course, we start with the data collection. So there are, as I mentioned from my earlier presentation, there are also types of unconventional data, say your Google Trend. We have other machine learning or data mining techniques to come up with a large as much as hourly data for data compilation. So these types of big data initiatives are very important, as was seen during the pandemic. So with the advancement of technology, these data collection techniques will be very useful for coming up with estimates of how the economy is doing in real time.
So thanks for that, Marcus, for that explanation. So any questions from our audience to our two presenters? They have presented very interesting topics. One is on nowcasting for the Philippine economy, and the other is on gender gaps in job search. So we welcome any questions that you might have for our two paper presenters. Questions, comments, or suggestions that you may have? So, Ms. Nikita, just one observation here. So, when the firm has already experienced hiring a female worker, so it increases the probability of them hiring additional female workers. So, this is regardless of the industry that they are in. Is that the case? Or
Yes.
regardless of the firm, the type of firm?
Yes, we can roll for that. So yeah.
Oh, so it seems that if women are already getting into that firm, then perhaps they have a good experience with having female workers.
Yes, or they also just have the infrastructure, so it's easier.
Ah,
So
yeah,
you have what it takes to keep and sort of retain women in your services.
because as you have mentioned earlier, they have already had those, more female-friendly facilities, right, in their offices.
Yes. Yeah.
So that would be that's an interesting observation that you're getting from this data that you're this is a job search platform, right?
Yes. It's active as we speak. It's been active for about 4 years now. Paused a little bit during COVID, but is back and still working.
So it's still, but earlier you mentioned that women, well, a larger portion of women hesitate to actually, signing up for the platform that they get matched. Is this something like what could be the factors that actually inhibit them or somewhat makes them hesitate for the reservation in signing up in these kinds of job seeking platforms? Have you explored that? It could potentially be the reasons.
So I think we can explore sort of ex post, looking at characteristics of the household of these individuals. But it looks like, so in general, the setting we're working in is conservative. Women's mobility is restricted, maybe less so in urban Pakistan than in rural. But in this general part of South Asia, be it Pakistan or India, women's movement outside the house is quite restricted. So you might see hesitation to sign up because you don't want a job outside the house. You might be willing to work at home, but maybe not outside. So that's one factor. Safety of transport, infrastructure at the firms. Will they have separate spaces for women? Will they keep them separate from men? Will women not face harassment? This is all common in the way of concern or things that might keep you from wanting to apply. But that's just, I'm hypothesizing. What we actively observe is that we ask households that we're surveying about the number of female members who work in their house, the number of female friends of a respondent who work, and those prove to be strong predictors. So if you see the women around you work and have good experiences, you might be more likely to work as well because you know it's safer. So we're still exploring some of that. We didn't explicitly ask, I think, at baseline about why, but we're able to infer looking at some characteristics that are common to these women who choose not to sign up.
Not to sign up and not to be part of let's say a job search platform. So that's actually so this is still a study in progress, so to speak.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
But it is actually an interesting stuff. So this is for this is in an urban setting, right? More of
I'm sorry,
this is actually in Lahore, which is an urban a city area.
Yes.
So any more questions or comments from our audience? Okay, I think if none, okay, so we were supposed to have a third paper presenter, but I think I'm not sure, perhaps he encountered some technical difficulties. So if there'll be no more questions, so join me in giving our two paper presenters who did an excellent job presenting the papers, Ms. Nikita Colley and Mr. Marcus and Pedro of PSP, a virtual big round of applause. So thank you very much, Ms. Nikita, Marcus. I think you did such excellent paper presentation. So, but before we close, may I just remind everybody, so just some logistics things, to kindly answer the attendance. Is that right? It's an, oh, okay. So we can get a group picture. Is that right? Okay, can I request everybody to please turn on your videos so we can have a group picture. Ayan. Can we request everybody to please turn on their video for a group picture? Miss Karen, ikaw ano?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Let's just wait for the others to open their cameras.
Please.
Okay, on 3, 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so before we close the link, a link is given in the chat box. So please, this is for the attendance. So kindly answer it. No? And also let me take this opportunity to invite everyone to tomorrow's breakout session. So the PES conference has its day 3 tomorrow. So there we will have more breakout sessions and plenary sessions. We'll have the closing plenary of the conference tomorrow at 3 p.m. So do join us again tomorrow for day 3 of the conference. Again, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miss Nikita. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you,
Thank you for
everyone.
organizing.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.